came from. I run this company called Sojourn Theater, which is a 13-year-old ensemble-based company, which was actually founded at Virginia Tech when I was a student of Bob's in the 90s. And the company began there and moved out to Portland, Oregon pretty immediately, where our home base was for almost 10 years. And for the last 3 years, the company now, I live in Chicago, and the company literally lives in 7 cities around the United States and are constantly together, like no more than a couple months go by without us being together on a project somewhere, some group of us. We just spent, 10 of us just spent 5 days in St. Louis as artists in residence at the Catholic Charities USA Anti-Poverty Summit, which I'll talk about at some point in the session because it was an amazing experience for us and very related to the cross-ideological work that we're talking about. So we make lots of different kinds of projects. We make projects that take the form of performance events and productions. We make projects that are long process-based events that have different strategies for public engagement, that have performative public expressions, but also are very process-based and community-building based. Sometimes we collaborate with companies, sometimes we collaborate with social service organizations, planning offices, universities. This particular project, which is a show called Waiting for You on the Corner of ... is a show that we started working on 2.5 years ago now with this company called The Team. The Team is a New York City-based experimental downtown ensemble that has a lot of acclaim internationally. They tour the world, and here is kind of thought of as like one of the downtown experimental hip companies, and they are, their endeavor of the past several years is how they sort of break through in the US market in the way that they have in the rest of the world. And they were taking on a project about political discourse in the US today. They don't have a ton of experience with engagement. I was introduced to their artistic director, Rachel Chavkin, and she was, I'd helped them. I'd done a workshop for them on interviewing a year before in relation to another project of theirs. They went to Las Vegas to learn about American capitalism, and I helped them kind of come up with their plan for working with unions and working with workers and others. So we got together to check in. She told me about this project. I said it was very related to some work Sojourn was doing around issues of polarization in the country right now. And so together we found our way to this show, sort of saying, wow, our companies, which are very different, might have an interesting experience if we work together. We have different aesthetics and different processes, but a lot of shared values and shared goals. Also, generationally, their company is a bit younger than our company. They are located in New York City. We are, for the most part, located in all these other places. That seemed like an exciting way together to think about an American discourse. So here comes someone else. Welcome, come on in. Hi. So we basically started first thinking about the show and how we were going to work on it and what its premiere life would be like. But very quickly, I realized that I wanted to make sure that if we were doing a show about civic discourse, and we were particularly looking at how people are attempting to build bridges in very polarized times, that we don't limit the brain trust to those artists doing the research and working in the room. That wouldn't it be exciting if we found some replicable strategy that other communities around the country could use to set up similar prompts and similar investigations without needing to put in the amount of resources or make the kind of commitment we were by doing a 2.5, 3-year project. So basically, we talked about this. The first thing that sort of came to us was this frame, a national act of civic imagination, because we knew that we were interested in inviting people to sort of make their own opportunities to imagine what civic discourse could look like in a different paradigm. So we spent a good bit of time thinking about, okay, what does that look like? Is it a script that we write and send out around the country and people do? You know, the way that the Laramie Project epilogue happened? We thought, no, that's not interesting at all to us. We would be more interested in trying to come up with a series of prompts that people can build their own events off of, that feel local and feel specific to the issues and narratives people want to explore, and most importantly, that is formally structured enough so people have a start, but is open so people can do whatever the hell they want to in terms of tactics, and we're then able to learn from what's going on around the country in relation to what some of these projects are. So we basically, one of the first things we did was sort of, Shannon Scrofano, who's not here, but is a Los Angeles-based digital media and spatial designer. She teaches at CalArts, and she's a main collaborator on this project. We started trying to find language that could cross these areas of applied performance practice, public interest design, and digital and virtual democracy, right? These different fields, and I'm just using whatever jargon I'm using in this moment, but there's lots of jargon that sort of people are often siloed in these different worlds, even though social practice and civic practice is going on from a lot of these different perspectives. Like Nina Simon in the museum world, right, who's doing this amazing work and is practically unknown outside of the museum world and the sort of culture think leaders world, which is changing a little bit because, of course, she's doing really, revelatory work around engagement. So how do we sort of make opportunities for people in these different disciplines to be in conversation? Good morning. We knew this would happen. We welcome you. So anyway, we sort of put out the call, and I want to just sort of show what the call looks like. If I can make this work. Sorry, a little silly. The invitation. Let's do that. Okay, look, it's got a nice little red envelope. Let's see how I'm going to get down here and get away from the red envelope. Okay, so what we set up was these things. We invite you to devise a scripted or non-scripted public event that practices democracy the way you and your collaborators dream it could be practiced. That's what we put out. And then we felt that for that to be useful, we also had to sort of have some parameters. So there's some questions. First of all, a lot of the initial conversation was people were going, it was actually very interesting. We tried to create something that was very permissive so people could invent, and the number of calls we got where people said, we're thinking about this, is this a Town Hall Nation event? Does this sound okay? We were like, yeah, I mean, these are the questions we're asking you to think about. These are sort of parameters, and the one that felt most important to us was it concerns itself with modeling possibilities for successful public interactions between community members and or leaders, and does not merely represent the obstacles to such interactions. Because our experience of surveying the landscape, given that there's a lot of engagement in public practice going on that tries to cross ideological borders, much of the arts-based work around discourse is very often either demonstrating the obstacles to effective discourse in an artistic medium, or finding ways for one group to have voice and then present that to other groups. The hardest thing, of course, that we all struggle with, I'm sure, is cross-ideological opportunities for people to actually engage in dialogue. So we were interested in people brainstorming, how do you work together in spaces through creative practice, through arts-based practice, to make these mini moments of democracy, of discourse, of public engagement. So we put the call out, and Imagining America came on as a partner. So we did this a couple ways. We got the call out into the network of ensemble theater world, we got it out into the theater world, we got it out into the university world, but Imagining America got really excited about this about a year and a half ago. And so they turned this into a collaboratory, which if you sort of know IA, you know they sometimes do these collaboratories. I don't completely know what it means, but it sort of means that a task becomes something that different members of the IA family can co-engage on, can think about together, and can use some sort of initiating impulse and perhaps artist or scholar as an advisor. So what we started doing a year ago, we started monthly phone calls for anyone in the country through the IA community who wanted to do a Town Hall Nation event. So we had people on the phone monthly, Oklahoma, Florida, Utah, California, Louisiana, Oregon, Michigan, Virginia, Ohio, Minnesota, and some of these events have happened, and some people are sort of planning the events. They are upcoming this year. Originally, our goal was that we wanted them to all occur between Caucus Day last January, where Sojourn and the team, the project I described, our companies were actually at the Republican caucuses as the guests of Black Hawk County Republicans in Iowa at the largest Republican caucus event. we were on the floor with Gingrich, Bachmann, and Santorum the night of the caucuses, with the press, and most importantly, with Iowans, and we actually got to be in the caucus groups, listening, observing, and talking to people, which was super exciting. And we were hoping that between that day and election day, that all the Town Hall Nation events would happen, and we would be sort of collating those. What's happened is actually a lot of people have taken them on as events that they wanted to work on starting last spring or summer, and then use this school year to sort of get a jump on, and then happen in the winter or spring. So some have happened already, and there's more sort of soon to happen. So we have actually sort of expanded the timeline of it and said, well, ideally democracy doesn't stop functioning after the election. We're figuring out if it's functioning as we approach the election.
Sometimes it does.
Right, and sometimes it does. So we are sort of opening up the kind of calendar world of it, and now we actually just had somebody approach us from a university in California, not the UC system. It's a little complicated. This happened in the last week, but somebody wants to do a media-related project with students across a bunch of universities nationally that would use this as a framework, and it's actually very exciting. And I tried to make it clear enough so I could talk about it today, and it's still another week or two before we can talk about it. There's not a lot of resources involved, but it's going to get this project out into a lot more places, and it's going to be a lot more digital and media based through this partner. So it's exciting, just that the idea of the structure is finding use for folks. And I said I run Sojourn. I've also started this thing called the Center for Performance and Civic Practice, which is a national entity working to innovate, aggregate, and disseminate work happening in the arts, humanities, and civic practice around the US. And I think that as this continues to evolve, this notion of replicable platforms that people can do their own work through, but that have resources and structures that help people kind of have starting impulses where they want them, is going to be one part of the center's work. So that's some context for where Town Hall Nation came from and how it sort of exists right now. And I feel like it would be worthwhile to sort of invite Bob and Decky to sort of talk about their specific work and projects. And maybe we can do that for a little bit, and then come back and sort of have some conversation. Yeah. And those that have joined a little late, I'm hoping that what isn't clear by the time we get through the project, you can ask me and then I can re-clarify. So, Bob, do you want to talk about building home and Town Hall Nation in Virginia?
Yeah. For you who came late, I'm Bob Leonard. I teach at Virginia Tech in the Department of Theater and Cinema. And perhaps you could share a bit about yourself.
Thank you, Bob.
Lisa Flanagan, Xavier University.
Mayors and elected officials and planners and so on and so on. For them, the arts and culture notion was it was a really seminal moment for me to actually be invited to sit at this theater. So long story short, I found myself working with Carol Davis and her colleague Kim Thurlow, who are the staff folks at the New River Valley Planning District Commission. And their assignment is to lead a process of planning, a 3-year process, to make a comprehensive regional plan. I don't know what the frame is, 10 years, 25 years?
20-year planning horizon.
20 years. And art and culture is considered to be a part of that. And the first notion, of course, was planning for art and culture. But the fact is that through the good graces of Carol's boss, they agreed to use art and culture as part of the process, as well as what we might be planning for in the future. And the Building Home project, which is what we are at the university, came to be. So it was and is a partnership with the planning district to use theater techniques, interactive story circles, Boal work, image theater, forum theater, so forth and so on, and games and exercises that are in Michael's book, Hope is Vital. And Michael, would you say the title of that book? Because
Theater for Community Conflict and Dialogue.
there, I always think of it as Hope is Vital, and I always blank off on the title. With a first-year graduate student who is now in his entering his third year, we began and created a series of events in 4 counties in the city of Radford to open up dialogue with folks who were interested in their own future. And not unsimilar to the notion of this project, Town Hall Nation, we were not coming in, although we were partnered with the planning district, we were not coming in from the point of view of a planning agenda. We were coming in with the agenda to spur a conversation about our future, whoever we were in the room. The theater techniques were designed to help that conversation, to open up the imagination, to begin to find folks like Callie who were over-imaginative in the civic discourse. And it was successful. It's been very successful. We've been meeting with groups of as small as 5 and as large as, say, 25 or 30 over the course of almost, a year and a half at least. And we've gone through what is the planning district's first phase, which is data collection. And they're about to go into a second phase, which is to put forward a set of scenarios that might be the beginnings of a plan, but to invest in a conversation with the public about those scenarios. And again, we're being asked to help in that conversation building and how we reach folks and so forth and so on. So out of this, the first-year graduate student coming to the end of his, into his second year and becoming more interested in also what he was doing as a theater artist. His notion was to take the data that we had collected, the qualitative data that we had collected, all the conversations, all the anecdotes, all the people, and all that stuff that had moved to the planning district, and make a play, which we would then turn back and play for the folks that had been the source. He titled the play, his name is John Catherwood Ginn, and I'm really speaking on his behalf because he is a day or two away from being a father for the first time. So he and his wife are at home waiting.
Which I told him was no excuse not to.
Really? Just lazy.
Absolutely not. Skype.
So John created this piece with the company that he had developed, which was basically a group of undergraduates, graduates, and community artists in the New River Valley. And they called it Weather System, W-H-E-T-H-E-R. It was a enactment, an embodiment of some of the anecdotes that had come forward.
And he was framing that as a Town Hall Nation event.
And, yes, and then we began to realize that this effort on his part was exactly what we were being charged to do or prompted to do by the Town Hall Nation. So we said, oh great, so we can just do what we're doing and we'll do that. And it was informative to the play because not only was it a set of anecdotes and stories which we then unpacked through these techniques of interactive theater dialogue, but also we set up a second act as a town hall meeting. And we took a look at the shape of the room, the way it was set up. The chairs are going this way. We started it out with the chairs all kind of in this kind of arrangement. They were not fixed. Had a little song, and then started asking questions about who's in charge of the room right now, how do you know that, and began opening up, and we made a circle, and everybody participated in making a circle, and we moved into storytelling around issues that had come up during the course of hearing and experiencing the anecdotes, pulling issues that seemed common and passionately held in the audience, and then had story circles. and began opening up the issues through those small group story circles they're always kind of amazing because they just explode. Once a person realizes that in the circle, I am my own authority, the circle acknowledges the authority of the individual and then the power of sharing. And that's the basic premise of the exercise. And that was our Town Hall Nation experiment. We did that towards the end of the school year, the end of John's second year, and it's now going into revisions, and we anticipate it will be a part of the second phase of the planning district project. And that's kind of the story.
That's a great start, and I would just say that Carol and Bob are doing a session later today where they're talking about building home in much more detail and the civic capacity building, and it'll include this Town Hall Nation event, but it's focused on the planning work and their use of a sojourn tactic that we went and worked with them on redesigning. That's going to be a really interesting conversation and very related to this work now.
Yeah.
So maybe at the end of this session we'll remind people of like where and when that is. I think would be great.
Yeah, your guess is as good as mine, but yeah.
We'll find out.
That'll be fantastic.
But Bob, I think that's a great start, and thank you. And Becky, maybe you could talk about Ipsy Rising.
I think I will also start with my collaborator, Caroline.
Yeah.
But we're going to make some handouts.
So we're going from Town Hall Nation, Virginia to Town Hall Nation, Michigan.
Michigan, Ypsilanti, or as I like to call it, Y-Town, which is about 10 miles from Ann Arbor, not even 3 miles from Ann Arbor. But it is a middle to low income community. It is where Ypsilanti is housed. It is where I live. So I live and work in the community that we built this project. And I felt, sometimes I call people like myself straddlers, where we work and live in the community, and sometimes I feel I speak very about and for the community. I don't want, and I'm thinking about the keynote yesterday when we're talking about neighborhoods and communities and what does that mean and who's the community, but I do believe that I am in the community, which isn't an ivory tower outside of the university, but it is a different entity, economically, access-wise. It is culturally, it's all those kinds of things. And the university, though it is the most highly trafficked place, it's 24,000 students actually. It's a commuter school, so the people who come into the university don't have as much engagement, interaction with the world beyond a couple streets. So there's several people like me at the university who are straddlers, students included. Kelly's one of them, who live and work in the community. And so we thought this was an opportunity. This gave us a little bit of we're not going through the community since we are the community, and that is a little bit of our beginning. And I think how you begin a project is so critical to its longevity, its strength, and beginning it with people that were of multiple worlds really, I think, helped. So I think you handed that stuff out real quick. I wanted to say, I'm going to get to the little history, and Kelly's going to get to sort of the essence of the project, but I'm listening to Michael, and so just as inspired, I was equally as inspired last year when this was brought to IA and on our phone calls, because sometimes you need something to say, okay, there's a lot of disparate discourse going on in this community. I know it. I'm not sure what the tools are. I don't know. I feel personally responsible because I work and live there to do something about it. And I wasn't sure where to go. And I think that the question that really, there's two things in here that really facilitated our project. One was how do you get people who don't get along, who have different ideological bents, philosophical bents, and in our case, political bents, to talk to each other face to face. The other one was, what is some kind of form or strategy or framework that can be replicated to multiple places and communities? So those two things served as sort of the essence and the backdrop for this particular project. So we convened university players who are straddlers and community players, and we talked about what are some things that you think this kind of approach would really benefit. What do you want to talk about? What can we do? And the big thing that a lot of people had talked about, and with students and staff and faculty and community straddlers, they said that there's this income tax up for, up on, in May, was this income tax. So the community, there was an income tax, and it's very, because the city has no money, it's gonna go broke in about 4 or 5 years, and in Michigan right now, you get an emergency manager put into your city if you're bankrupt, and that will basically, every elected official, every union contract is gone.
Flint has that right now.
Flint has it right now, they're
Sure.
gone, right, Benton Harbor, Michigan, and Ypsilanti is around 4 years away. Because its major income is the university and all the manufacturing places have closed. So there's been this big push to put an income tax, which means people like me who work at the university would then give money back to the community. And then there was an anti-tax group, so there is the Save Ipsy campaign. And then there's SCIT, no city income tax or something like that, or something, Stop City Income Tax, that's what it's called. So, and they were heavy camps, they're both really engaged, a lot of them are elected officials, a lot of university players advocating one side versus another. And so we thought this would be a phenomenal sort of project to really get people to talking about some of these real core issues. Well, they wouldn't even go in the same room with each other at all. We could, before the election, they refused to even debate on the issues beforehand. So for us to do a project with and about and for this, it was not possible. They wouldn't even go in the same room. They said after the election. After the election. So we waited till after the election. And in brief, so we had a whole bunch of stuff. We were going to do more of a, we were basically going to just take the sort of ideas and transcripts of the people involved in both of these entities and perform them verbatim, with the idea that if somebody else performs their voice, maybe that will catalyze some dialogue. Just hearing somebody else perform somebody else's words might generate some thought. Well, they wouldn't do it. So we looked at the assets of our community, and very briefly, we're like, what does this community have, and what is it? And they bake really great bread, simply. And there's a great place that all factions of this community hang out at. It's called Beezy's Cafe, and they make homemade bread. And I thought, okay, we're going to move beyond the performance of the body, and we're going to look at the performance of play, and use it as a mediator, possibly, between and among people. A lot of the conversations in this debate were virtual and online, and I really took the idea, how do you get people talking to each other, not at each other? I went really literally, how do you do it? Well, maybe if they shake bread, if they break bread, maybe they'll talk to each other. So that is the essence of this project.
I'm gonna say as you go on, I just wanna note, I feel like what Becky just described in terms of this, okay, it's not a play, so what are the assets? Like, it's such a clear example of looking at the arts and performance as a set of assets and a spectrum of potential activity rather than theater, play. I guess that's our strategy. And I know at the center, we are really trying to build this conceptual muscle with artists and scholars around the country. So if you're a theater practitioner, it doesn't mean play or improv. It can, but it's about what are the needs and what are the assets. So it's exciting.
Yeah, and I would say, Michael, I mean, the great thing about that too is that, you know, looking at, we've got this group of artists who are straddlers and all this stuff, and instead of going right to, you know, play and whatever, our asset is that we're able to work with somebody who is going to create something that we don't know what it is, right? So we're giving them this lump of dough, but we're people who are good at watching a process happen, discussing the process as it's happening, and then kind of facilitating, well, what was that just happened, and dealing whatever weird or fabulous things kind of come out of that process. So if we have somebody who comes out saying, well, this is my lump and I'm not shaping it, like, as artists, our asset is that we can go with that. We can roll with that, we can make something about that, we can talk about that process, we can, you know, we can expand from there. And so looking at, you know, kind of what we bring to the table, even if it's not, you know, when Decky first met with me, she's like, well, how do we want to approach this? And, you know, me being a theater person, I was like, forum, playback, image, no, a combination of image and playback. And then we do, and, you know, and none of it fit, right? None of it fit. And then it's like, okay, well, let's take the skills we use doing those forms versus those forms, right? So we have a facilitation skills that we use. We have, you know, we have metaphor, we have transformation that we can work with. So how do we then take
Collaboration.
collaboration? And so it became about transformation and collaboration.
And a little too heavy on the metaphor, but we'll get to that.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
Can I just, how did you get from the place that makes great homemade bread to we give people dough?
Okay, so we'll back up a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay, so basically what we did is we worked with with Beezy's Cafe, and we we'll get to the nuts and bolts. And they rented out, we let they closed at like 4, so we had the place from like 6 on. We gave them $150, it did cost a little bit of money for the supplies. And we invited people who had been involved on both ends of the political debate on this thing, including the mayor, elected city council, community activists, straddlers, university straddlers, and then we had a host of community members, university students, and colleagues of mine. I have a colleague of mine who's a communication faculty member whose research is in town halls, and he was a documenter. And then I had another creative writing professor who also is a straddler. She did Occupy Ipsy, which was the big, so she was also our documenter as well. So we had really interesting documentation, because I worked with Shannon and Michael on what do we document, what would be valuable for you so you can replicate. So trying to get different kinds of notes and documentation. And then we invited them via email, in person, went to actual meetings, went to their actual, invited them to participate and called them. We got the city planners coming to this. So we had a really cross-section, about 35 people from all elements of the city, but particularly those involved in this, those people who were not talking to each other at all came. And we set up the space, and I'm actually gonna get to that in a second. We set them up in square tables so they had to look at each other. That was key. And in each particular table, we had accoutrements, like you had your bread, everyone had a bread, but they had different kinds of things that they could add to the bread. And going back, what do we do all artistically? Well, what does it mean to add something? When you add this, what could it be? If you shape it like this, what might it mean? So we began with the prompt, not what is your vision for the city, but how do you see it now? We talked about immediacy, and that was really, we spent a lot of time talking about what is the question that's going to allow them entry, not inhibit. These are not theater people. We're not asking, these are not performers. What is it but theater is about immediacy. And so we felt very strong that what we can do is address what is happening in time and space right now, feel. So we get to feel, we took it out, we end fun.
And that was, I think that was also a way too to really honor and address the different viewpoints that we were coming from. Do you know that we, the very first thing we could do, the very first thing that we could talk about to bring us together is that we have different visions of what this is, right? And so we're talking about working towards a future, but we don't even know what that future is that we're working towards, right? So we've got to step back and say, we've got to honor that the realities of what this is now and then what potential futures we might be working for are very different things. And so we felt it was really important because we started in very future places and hopes and dreams and what is this, and we just discovered that there was so many holes in the discourse because people were assuming that everybody was working from the same place they were, right? Of course.
Jackie's not just going on Facebook to check messages. She's going to show some
We
stuff.
just want to see what everybody's
We have
doing.
a page, we have Ipsy Rising, so it's a
Yeah.
pretty active now community page in which people from the community can post ideas in different, not just related to this issue, and then we have the pictures, but I'm a math girl, so it's going to take a little bit of time here.
Do you want me to talk about the actual day of?
Yeah, we can talk about the day of life, figure that stuff out. One thing I just want to respond to Della is how do we get to the bread? So just to clarify, is that once people entered, they had to do one thing. They had, as people came in, there was greeters. We had people who were greeters that welcome people in, and then they had to make a name tag. The name tag was your identification within this particular community at large. Like, I'm a recycler. I am, however they self-defined was really critical because and this is where you talk about how do we use our own artistic sensibilities? Well, you meet people where they are and not where you think they should be. So, who are you? Here, now, space, time. So we really focused on immediacy and here and now, and we began with, so people were referred to sometimes as oh, the recycler or whatever they were referred to. So I will do that.
Do you want to keep talking? And I'll just
Okay.
sign on and then find your page.
Yeah, that's great, thanks. All right, so we can go through the actual sort of essence of things and our asset-based approach to it. creating Ipsy Rising. And really, Ipsy Rising, one of the things that we talk about collaboration, but really it was metaphor, obviously. There was an artist years ago that I worked with, Jillian Eaton, who some of you may know, and she said, you know what, when you can't find your way in, you just gotta find a metaphor. Find a metaphor. And bread was initially not the metaphor. It was just an opportunity because it was an asset in our community, but it became a metaphor for the way in which we could work together, because people could shape something on their own. They could cross-shape, cross-fertilize, right? So after we asked people what their reality was, did everyone get one? Oh, I'm sorry. After we asked them what the reality was, we basically asked them to shape and then they had to give it a title. And then what they did is they worked with people in their table, said, can I take something from yours? And then, can I take something? So basically, they ended up sharing and shifting their vision based upon their conversations with each other across the table. And that was intentional. Like, how do you see Ypsilanti? Does it change based upon how the person across from you titled it?
Yeah, so, I think the really interesting part of that thing is, as I was telling Becky, that there's something that happens, there's something that happens around food, yeah? So there's something that happens around dinner tables and food, and so there's a civility that somehow was imposed because there was food involved. And I don't assume that this is automatic, that this would always happen, but there's a civility that happens, and in a place where they could see each other. But the act of crafting food and the act of working with food brought a familial sense to that. Now, not to say we didn't have disagreements and we didn't have, challenges to each other, but there was something that because we were working with food and because we had this kind of atmosphere that was this cafe in which BZ talks about, B talks all about, creating the design of it so that people run into each other. Right? And so when you go to order, they shout out your name, so you get to know people, right? And you can't move in the place without bumping into, you have to move and navigate around each other. And she said this is very intentional, right? And so we're in this kind of really cozy, really fabulous kind of dinner space. And so yeah, as people were crafting, there was this kind of automatic civility. And we had artists placed around at the different tables to help facilitate it, but I found that we didn't really need us. That the conversations were kind of happening as they were shaping, as they're playing with it, and some people, it was a great opportunity for some people who didn't feel like I'm not much of an artist, so here's my thing, and other people were like, well, I'm not much of an artist either, and it became about something additional. I won't say something else, but it became about something else, which was this act of kind of sharing in this really. We had different ingredients at different tables, so people had to get up and share if they wanted to use different ingredients, and so there was like ingredient swapping happening, which was really cool.
We could, and maybe we'll do this afterwards, but just thinking about the elements that you're describing right now in terms of the space, in terms of the strategies of different ingredients that have to be brought together, the tasks that force people to engage with each other and that allow discourse to happen in a way that feels sort of authentic because they have to do the task, but is actually acting as this lubricant for these relationships to temporarily occur, just to note that.
And one thing I think is interesting when you talk about what are sort of the ingredients, one of the ingredients is space. It's proxemics, right? So a lot of in performance or theater, space can facilitate meaning in many multiple ways, and so space was critical. So one of the ways in which we spent a lot of time is figuring out how the space and the proximity of all things to each other and how that might engage people more directly. Simply, food, and there's been a lot of work and performance work on this on the use of food, the people's food. There's that kind of movement, and there's the whole idea of food as an arbitrator and a mediator, and it's a bridge. And there's a lot of, it's really simple, but there's a lot of truth in that, actually. I mean, it was amazing to me that people who did not talk, and one thing we did say is that you need to sit at a table with people maybe you don't know very well. That was your one direct. Maybe you've had some nasty Facebook communications. Maybe, and there's been several. There's a page on here. There's a lot. It was very, very antagonistic. Actually, it was very visceral and very vitriolic, rather. And
around the taxes.
Very, and people were not, I mean, even the day before, even after it had passed, because actually it lost, I should say, that there's no income tax.
Which means it's more likely that there'll be an emergency.
Correct, yes, there's more likely, so it lost by 2-1, actually. And so it was very vitriolic, and so people really were only online, just rioting at each other. And so we really, on the advice of some community members, they were like, you really need to make sure that people who don't talk to each other sit next to each other. And so we did. And so we really did, and
But they did it on their own.
they did not, yes, they did, yes, they did it on their own, and they sat together and they talked. Talking about, I was just gonna say something, Michael, I'm a process person, but I felt under the product. And so as you look at strategies, I think one of the things for us was like, could I let go of the idea of, we can let go of the idea of not having something really tangible besides bread. Like, could we do that? And I'm still debating that. I felt that we layered it a little too much in our first round. We had image work going on. They had to create an image of what they want the city to be based upon their discussions. I mean, we didn't need to do more than we needed to do. So we're doing these again in surrounding different ideas and issues. So we're going to have 3 of them throughout the year at the same place with different kinds of people. But one of the things that I think was important for us was to let go of the need for product and for something that was multidimensional.
Which is really important around this whole conversation, because often when we're bringing arts practices into this kind of process work, there is this pressure, both internal and external, that with what I understand theater and art to be is something that is expressive, and the expressive is public, and the public has to be sort of standalone and separate from the process. How do I understand something that's a sequence of imaginative acts and expressive actions that is not simply a culminating moment, but is throughout? And that's a real challenge we face doing public practice around this work, that is going to conceptually broaden and isn't just about the production of plays. So I'm really glad you broached it. I feel like I want to make sure that we sort of aim out here, but there's 3 folks who weren't in here the last time we did intros, so maybe we can just do hellos and where you're from, and then we'll go right into conversation, but I'll start over here.
Hi,
Just name and where you're from.
I'm Natasha. I'm from Greece. I'm a theater person as well.
Thank you, Natasha. Welcome.
Lois Arthur from the University of Iowa and co-director of the Caribbean Diaspora United Studies program, and also a costume designer.
Carolyn Colvin, University of Iowa, and I'm in the College of Education.
Thanks, the University of Iowa. That's great. So, Bob, do you want to come back up? Is that okay? And Callie, come up, and we can just, these don't have to be questions, just thoughts you're having. We have, we have a little more than half an hour for a conversation, which can be you asking us to think out loud about some other things, can be just sort of sharing some thoughts you're having at this moment. And you just had your hand up, actually.
Yeah, I have a question. So, I guess how did you get people to come in the first place? Just because if they're not even willing to have a debate, how did you sort of frame it, saying this is something different?
Well, one, I mean, I just handed out this little flyer that got passed around, that we actually, we did some actual print, and we actually had an evening of bread shaping, baking, creativity, conversation, and community. So it was pretty innocuous, actually. It wasn't like, let's talk about the text. So, let's talk about the fact that you're not talking. I mean, we didn't really preface it that way. And how you begin something, I am in the community. I live there. Those are my neighbors. A lot of people. They're people I work with. I know people so I think that part of that is having people who are not, I mean, it's of the theater, it's of the community for the, for the community and with the community, and I'm of for and with, personally, as are a lot of other people. So I began with those layers, and I think that helped it, and it was BC's, and it was bread.
It's such a good question, because everybody, this question is strategically, when you're doing cross-ideological work, the biggest question. So I think if each of us maybe respond to this for a moment, it's a big one.
Yeah, truly, it is the question in some ways. If you get people together, it'll take care of itself. Who's getting together and how are they coming together is a major question. not only is it problematic if you say, hey, let's get together and talk about the taxes, or the worst thing that we could possibly choose to talk about together. The other thing is, hey, let's get together and do some art together.
That's right.
You know, it's like, not me. So we had this whole period of time when we were trying to figure out what in fact do we do, and the first step that we had to struggle with was with the planning district itself, because the invitation had been made and we were part of the program, but none of the staff had been involved in making that decision. So they were pretty much arms folded and eyes closed about, okay, we're going to do what? And we started doing some exercises and game playing. And it was like, okay. We then basically began seeking out leaders, folks in the community, maybe not elected leaders, maybe not recognized leaders at certain places of power, but neighborhood leaders, people who are doing things, people who are taking care of the neighborhood or doing this or that. We essentially had a whole stretch of time doing what we were calling scouting, just going out and talking with people. And John came to me at one point and he said, you know what? This project is about talking with folks. It isn't about getting people together in order to talk with folks. It's about talking to start. And you start with a person.
Yeah, and yes, we talk a lot about audience design.
Yeah.
As a core part of the dramaturgy of any project or practice that we take on. So that from the beginning of working on something, we are not just making something and then hoping that the people we are aiming at show up through marketing efforts. And this actually, I gotta stay away from my soapbox, but conversations I'm involved with in the larger sort of institutional arts and university worlds are about this notion of engagement as something that happens post the making or curating and presenting, and then we gotta get the right people, we gotta find the right group.
Yeah.
As opposed to the notion of co-making, co-authoring, collaborating throughout the process of selection, creation, and presenting. So the time you get to the event, you already have a team of, if you're working cross-ideologically invested partners and collaborators who are already interested. So, you know, the work indeed is going out and talking to people. Bob worked with us 2 years ago on a show that looked at urban-rural conversations in Oregon and involved bringing urban and rural communities together. And that meant for a year and a half before the project, going out and asking people questions so that by the time we got to the art making and the art, they were invested in the conversations they've been having with us and were very willing and interested in being a part of the event because they felt they had been a part of making the event.
Right.
Whether or not we identify them as co-authors, they were collaborators.
Yeah.
So it's always about how do we design for the richest, most successfully diverse constituencies in that room, otherwise the event itself will not be rich, which means you have to commit to it the same way you invest in the art making in the studio or whatever it is.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, is it Breezy or Beezy?
Beezy.
Beezy's place is a perfect example,
Yeah.
but they're all over the place.
Right.
They're all over the place.
Yeah.
There are people who would get together to take care of their children, PTAs, the parent advisory group for the Head Start programs around the country, I mean around the region. They're all interested. And there's a group of people that self-describe as Renew the New. It's a group of people who are trying to clean up the New River in their county. And they are proud of the fact that they've got Baptists and they've got anarchists and they've got the elected officials and they've got the sheriff and they've got the constituency of poachers and the folks who are fishing out of season. And all of them go down there and pull tires out of the river. And they are nervous about opening up the conversation beyond that because they can do that and not get into it, quote unquote. But they are also way deep into it, actually. So how you find those groups of people that are self-gathered with their own agenda and find a way to come together and just talk about, and things rise up out of that. And we've met, just had wonderful, amazing gatherings with community groups that just self-describe out of their own socio-political need, and then groups of people that are getting together because they love music. So there's a place out in one of the counties, Floyd County has a music place. It's Floyd County Country Store, and they do flat footing and jamming on Friday nights and have done for the last
30
many
years.
many decades. And the folks that are running that are recognizing that the group of people that are being pulled together are from across the board in a county that is incredibly divided between the come-heres and the been-heres, between the farmers and the boutique people. There's an aging hippie crowd that got into Floyd back in the day, and they were at odds with the folks that
Be
lived.
careful, the Floyd story can be an hour.
Yeah,
Not
I
your
know.
but the Floyd
Yeah.
story is so
Yeah.
Yeah,
complicated.
it's amazing.
Yeah.
And there's this music place where people from all of different, and they come together, and the folks that are running it realize that they've got something that has some value in the community beyond the music night.
It's an amazing place.
Yeah, so, and they are asking us to help and come in and work towards that sort of community vital place like BCC's.
I want to come to your question, because you had something to go.
It's very complicated in my head too, but I mean, when you talk about, having to let go of actually having a product, I keep trying to imagine sort of this question of, then does your product become continued engagement with that issue?
That's right.
And
And those people.
And those, but I mean, to what extent then do you, as an artist or to artists, do you move away from doing your work when you move into this thing that becomes an issue that's totally separate, and this is kind of what I struggle with my community work, right? It's like, I'm pulled into something that has a quite different shape, and it's not exactly what I want to be doing, so I keep pulling the arts back into it, right? But when the product becomes something that's very much about, it's civic engagement, but with the civic, you know what I mean? And how do you feel about that, and do you find that you're continuing to work in that area? And
I think it what Dr. Michael said though. I think the idea that how do you reuse, embrace our artistic sensibilities and all that stuff. Like a product is not necessarily what is going to work within this world, and so I let that go. It's not about me, really. It's about the work, and do I have some tools that I can
Sorry, I ended
bring
up
to-
behind you.
Oh, it's okay. I don't want to block
Oh,
you.
yeah,
No,
I'm
you
sorry.
need to sit.
I have
So
a
does
res-
it end?
Hmm?
If I could just compliment
Yeah.
the question, does it end?
Well, we have a virtual conversation continuing, so I don't think it ends.
I just want to respond to what you said, because I think you're asking, in addition to a specific project, you're asking about the life of an artist and their sort of body of practice and how it comes in and out.
well, no, I mean, I am thinking about it was kind of the question,
Right.
does it end? Because what I find is, in my particular community thing, I got pulled into sort of forming a community association, right?
Exactly.
And it's very different than why I went into sort of a dialogue that was kind of similar to this, sort of from an
Yes.
arts perspective. So in that work, I have this whole other body of work now that I do outside of my job, but I try to link to the university, its resources, the arts, blah, blah, blah. But it does become something quite different, and I guess I just wonder, for many of these things, does it end for you, or do you find yourself like doing this whole separate thing, and how do you work your practice into it? And I know that you have
Oh my
some.
God.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna attempt a coherent response to that, but I'm excited by your question about what is the product of this. And for me, as a planner and not as a non-artist, I've been hungry for so long to be able to have a meaningful, nuanced dialogue with citizens between themselves, and between citizens and decision makers and people in positions of official power. And to me, what I've seen break down is that the process has broken down to people are given binary choices late in the game, where their options are to be for or against proposal A. And they're not brought into the process in the imagining stage. And for me, the product is to reimagine expertise, and that the expertise of the civil engineer is not or the people who know about water quality or something like that is not the only thing that's considered. It's the vision, the concerns, the priorities of the citizens are just as fundamental, if not more so, as the expertise that's considered. And then the other product I think that comes out is the capacity and the expectation that civic problem solving is a shared responsibility, not outside. You know, like the town should do this, or the government should do this, or we're prevented, you know, just identifying obstacles, as you said, and saying, here are the challenges of our community, and they're interrelated, and it's our responsibility together to navigate that, and begin imagining solutions that are real and actionable. That for me is the product.
Well, there's levels of leadership on that too. So, you know, it may start out as an artist-led project or whatever that is. And so you're talking about that it's gone into this different place, that it's involved in lesson. And so I think that that's one of the things that gets me excited about this is this opportunity to say, okay, you know, in this phase of the project, you know, maybe it's an artist-led and we're moving into something else. And now maybe we're moving into something that's, this phase of the project is urban planning-led, and we're moving into into these different parts of the project. So just because we're not coming out with a play doesn't mean that my skill set in the beginning parts of the process, or whatever part that it calls for, isn't really crucial, and then being able to have the community partnership so that you then can pass those leads on to somebody who, yeah, that is what they're geeked about too. And so then we can work together, and I can take a step back too and work in the art side of stuff, but let somebody, you know, work in their geeked field for a while, and then I can go. So I think that community partnership you talk about is essential in that, so that when it gets, okay, we're in a part that's really far from the art stuff right now, that's cool because I'm gonna help support somebody who's working with that other stuff. And then eventually, maybe it swings back around to the art stuff, and then I'm on again, right? But I'm still involved in the process, but I don't know, that.
I think this question is enormously important and by no means simple to answer. And the wonderful question doesn't end. I think that we all need to be thinking about this in quite serious fashion, because both the university and the artist worlds are oriented to time-limited events. And we're oriented to that in a very deep way. We don't maybe even realize it. But the self-described moat around the university reinforces that the entrance of the university into the community is time-specific. You come out here and do something and you leave. You don't leave it, honey. And this straddler kind of question that you raised brings up the whole question about commitment and what it is that we're doing. And I don't think there's, in my mind at least, there's not a better, worse thing, but clarity and transparency is really important, to know what it is that I'm doing and can find ways to say, and I'm done now. And everybody is clear of it. But I personally am in a place where I'm recognizing that my commitment is way more than getting this product of a play done or this student graduated. But that I am looking for ways to be responsibly and in a satisfying fashion part of my own community. And there are ways in which the university mitigates against that in a pretty serious way. And also, what is it that we're actually working on? And for me, I'm coming to a place where I'm understanding that democracy as an institution is what I'm working on in my own way. And it's not necessarily this problem or that problem, but the institution,
The practice
of a people determining their own future together is what I'm working on. And that calls me then to a product which is quite long-term in the doing.
Go ahead.
You know, I take your point. I do think there's an interesting phenomenon in which nonprofit arts organizations, NGOs, things that are pretty structured, they start and then their goal is to last forever. I think you see younger people and DIY organizations which start out of a more sort of charismatic idea and then they go until they're done.
Yes.
So, I mean, I think the reason this is such an engaging question is we all know of institutions which should have gone out of business years ago.
Yes.
and they just keep going because that's what institutions do. So, including universities, so it's not.
Yes.
I understand this thing about, semesters ending and everyone's supposed to stop, but it's complicated.
It is complicated.
There's a bunch of hands popping up now, which is exciting, so I saw it here and then
Yeah.
here and then here.
I think your question is a really good one about like the art, because I'm dealing with it right now. I and another professor, I'm in English, and we're doing a book on service learning and literature. And we have 18 professors who are all English professors, we're all literature professors. We're doing the book for the Modern Language Association, and it's their first service learning book. And in every essay, as they come in, we can see social justice, we can see social consciousness, but everyone, we know that it's the Modern Language Association, it's literature professors. And we have to say to ourselves and to our authors, okay, but what's this doing for literature? Like, I see the social justice, I see where you're going in whatever product, but what's it doing for that? So over and over again, that's an issue. And it's an issue not only because we'd like MLA to publish this book, but it's also an issue because we get paid by the university to teach literature. And they'll say to us, then go to student services if all you're doing is social justice, right?
Yeah,
You're going into another field that's not what you're trained
Well, I
for.
see this in the arts, social
Yeah.
practice, that I'm basically visual arts. For the longest time, people like, well, you're doing this thing with food, or you're doing this, but where's the art? And there's a lot of
Where's
discussion
the
about that.
literature?
Yeah, and as an administrator, I'm really good at sort of justifying that for my artists, but then when
Yeah.
I'm involved in that project and I don't have that distance,
Yeah.
then that's where my question comes out of too, and it's like,
Yes.
then for me, how do I navigate that?
But see, one of the things that we did, because we wrote sort of the introduction to this book before we got all the essays, and everybody talks about the public humanities. And nobody is really sure what it is. And, we did a history of of all of the heads of MLA talking about the public humanities since the 1980s, and no one having any sense of what it is, and yet calling for it, right? And then when you do it, they say, but where's the literature? So it's, in some respects, it is reconceptualizing what literature does. And looking at it, not that you're saying, oh, Shakespeare's just a vehicle to social justice, but because we have essays on restoration drama and service learning. But how can you reconceptualize who analyzes literature, who's an expert in understanding it? It's giving over a certain amount of power from, the experts with PhDs, but not entirely, right? So it's really interesting, and you're doing it in art, but I feel it with every single one of these 18 essays, constantly asking. I can hear the head of MLA saying, okay, but where's the literature?
So when did the book come out?
I want to get Dallas comment.
I would change my comment based on what you said, but I want to come back to the original question, because I think it's a powerful question with regard to our sustained presence in the university and sustained credibility within the university and the possibilities thereof to mobilize those resources. But that goes to the question I really do want to ask, which is about sustainability and sustenance. So, which is what really I heard in part you asking, or maybe I was just projecting. But the claim, the need in my community, the need to keep an organization of some kind of presence alive in an ongoing way as a fundamental structure of trust. And that if you it's the come and go phenomenon that, is part of the product orientation, but that also means, so little investment from community members in process. So with that in mind, I have to say I got kind of the heebie-jeebies when you use the language of replicability, which sounds to me very much out of the sciences and experimentation, just as a semantic, because it's straight up here.
Yeah.
So I get that.
Yeah.
It could easily fall into something formulaic. I mean, I'm sure you've thought about that a million times.
I'll respond when you're done.
Okay, so I'm done.
Oh, no, I just think, I totally hear you. I mean, I think for me, the notion of scalability and is perhaps a better word, but I personally don't mind the word replicability because to me, it's not about formula. It's about opportunities for people to invent their own versions, to evolve a process or a practice in their own local context. And in some contexts, the notion, I know this from people who've been working on this project, that when they are able to say to their department or their higher ups at the university that they are part of a national project, which they don't realize is this like small not-for-profit that like has a website and basically has been getting the work around the country, but they can send someone to the website in the provost office and then suddenly they like are part of a national thing, and so, oh yes, of course you can have the $1,500 you need for the bread materials or like whatever you need because you are doing something that is being researched and explored in all these different contexts, which is different than if you at University of Minnesota come to the provost's assistant and say, I just have this idea for this thing, that sounds great, see if you can get your department to care about it, great, versus like, look, it's a thing, and we're going to do our own thing, and they're going to document it, and it's going to be talked about at this thing. Like, that seems to help people have the gravitas to make their own work. So my interest at Sojourn, and especially at the center, is to find ways to provide structures that are, from an aesthetic and engagement and intellectual way, sort of provocative and stimulating that people want to take on, but also that help give people systems and structures that they can use the replicability or scalability factor to get some footholds in their own systems and try to do the work. But I also want to take that to, I just feel like about this sort of end and the artist's sort of personal work. I'm gonna try to be so fast with this, but this feels really related to me. This idea that I feel like most people at this conference look at the arts and humanities as a dialogical phenomena, as sets of exchanges and encounters. But traditionally, most arts and humanities have been monological, right? I mean, they've mostly been the presentation, the production and presentation of material and product. It's been about witnessing and consuming. That's how we've worked with our audiences and our constituents, as witnesses and consumers. And now there are these, across many fields, museum, everything, there are these really significant movements to break the sort of traditional system-based monological approach. And so we're moving into this acknowledgement that Freire isn't just about liberatory pedagogy and education, but actually dialogical work exists in all of our work. And I think I'm starting to find that artists are starting to talk about social practice and civic practice in ways that distinguish them but make them useful coming in and out of careers. And what I mean by that, like at the simplest level, is social practice is artistic or humanities-based practice that engages non-artists, constituents, community members in some way, conceptually and in practice, beyond just receiving the material, but the project initiates with an artist. The project initiates as part of the artist's practice. Now, they may work collaboratively and as co-makers in community, but it starts conceptually from the artist or scholar's vision, idea, invitation. Civic practice is when, and is sort of, in a way, like this project here with particularly this partnership, where there is a non-arts sector partner who expresses a need and builds a relationship with an artist, and the artist's assets can actually work to move towards that need and desired outcome of the non-arts partner. And so a lot of artists are used to approaching dialogical work from the social practice way, but the civic practice kind of opens up, like this whole way of relationship building that's less about product and is more about relationship, but also has process and product markers. So I just want to say that, like, I think that a big problem, challenge, opportunity in our field is that we look at dialogical as like, oh, it's a couple tactics that involve some interactivity.
Right.
And still the artist kind of comes up with a thing, and we do our Boal thing, we do our thing that we do. And I love Boal and was a mentor and friend, so it's not like, it's not about Boal. But that's like, here's my idea to go do something, here's my tactics, I think they need something from me, I've got an idea for a project. Versus also, I'm building relationships which allow my practice to sort of have this civic in. And then I'm finding like where these things blend with each other is where artists are making really interesting bodies of work. Because they're going back and forth. And this doesn't mean they can't also do monological work, I don't mean that. But that in the dialogical context, they're sort of finding like, oh, I come up with a social practice project, I do the work, and then a year and a half later, that partner I made, who I've developed a relationship with, has this need, and they don't need a play, they need this other thing, and I actually know how to do that other thing. Because I know about coalition building, and I know about problem solving, and I know about making a room work, and I know about building partnerships in the community. So suddenly, like, I can do this, which might lead me to my next social practice project, so I can remain engaged with this network of relationships over time, and have these different practices happening rather than start done. So I just wanted to put that frame out there. That's what I'm doing at the center a lot, is trying to like work with these frames and think about that. So. Yes?
I'm just going to talk as a European outsider a little bit. I've been affiliated with educational and advocacy for arts institutions in Greece, Germany, and the United States, but New York, sorry. Small place. I never had to, I mean, apart from New York, I never had to answer that question that, why is this art? How can I sell this? How am I going to use this? How am I going to present this as an artistic piece for like the masses? It's the first time that I actually have to go through this process, so this is very interesting to me. Because every time, it would be like, well, there's a kooky artist, and or that's how you present it, like the person with a scarf, and then you have all these other people that are professionals, and it's exactly the social engagement. You have like a civil engineer, you have an architect, they're gonna make this huge thing, we're gonna make it a bit Alfredo Yarish, and it just works. It's what you say actually, is that why do we make art, why do we write literature or read it, because what do we want from it? And what we want is the engagement. So if you already have it from before and the community knows about it, I think the answer is just there. Because you have people that study this, I mean, art, A, B, C, and we're trying to make something that will have the response to art, but it can include more people because the communities are larger. I don't know if that makes sense.
But I think you get, I mean, what you said brought up something for me is that artists, maybe in America, maybe it's our curse, right, struggle publicly with, you know, how people define us, that we aren't understood as like of someone that comes to the table with skills that could actually enable a project to do something different, right? And I find when I think about artists I know who I have known as social practitioners in one way or another, and are now even stepping back and saying, you know, I'm not really sure that that's art because there's no wonder in it, and they're having trouble defining themselves, I think, you know, and being understood as a person with skills, you know, with a job to do in society, so.
That's why I do think that like this example here, where this sort of assets meet this need, you know, I would suggest that there actually is wonder. There may not be spectacle, but there's wonder, and I actually think it's interesting because when social practitioners talk about the lack of wonder or awe, I think that they are really thinking in a spectacle context and not thinking about what happens from person to person in moments of encounters, which can be quite filled with awe.
I just want to put in real quickly the important matter about what is the problem we're working on. And all too often we're looking at solutions. I work with an extraordinary scene designer named Randy Ward who puts this forward in terms of how we collaborate together on making a play. And as we find a problem, offering the solution before we know what the problem is terribly ineffective. And it takes away from the asset of the designer if you tell the designer, well, see, you know, I want a door here. And well, he doesn't know what the problem is in terms of on and off stage, getting on and off stage. He doesn't know that yet. He doesn't understand that yet. So that principle permeates my work in my working with planning with Carol and Kim. But I think it's also throughout our community, I'm discovering that people are very much in the habit of thinking that you're supposed to fix my problem. But we haven't really defined the problem. So when we talk about expertise, when we get together in circles, we're asking people to be expert in identifying their own problem, rather than thinking that we've got to have the expertise of solution first. But if we look to, I can tell you exactly what's going wrong in my community, my town, my neighborhood. And people who might be helpful in that haven't heard that yet. Because they're thinking they know the problem, they just got to get everybody lined up behind the right answer.
And related to that, of course, is that the collision of problems, the collision of perspectives on problems is where drama comes from.
Yeah.
Both in terms of literature and dramaturgy and plays, but also in terms of wonder in a room when you're trying to bring people together. But Dana, you had something.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so inspired by all this work. I want to thank you guys for sharing this. One thing that I keep thinking of, I'm not doing work through a university. All of the work that I've been doing for the last 15 years or so has been in running nonprofit organizations from the community-based perspective. And I feel like the biggest challenge and the people who I would love to see in this room are the funders and sustainers who make this work possible. Because what you're proposing is a radical re-envisioning of what it means to even make art. So I fear that so much of what we do is guided by this process that's dictated by the funders of you have to propose your project 6 months in advance, and then there needs to be a specific process and then a product that we can come and see, and then you need to evaluate what the impact of that product was. And what we're talking about is totally radically different. It's saying you can't propose something 6 months in advance and know what it's going to look like. There doesn't have to be a product, or the idea of a product is going to be something different. So how do you sustain?
They're in the conversation. Yes. The funders are in the conversation.
They are.
We can give examples of that if you want to talk about that.
Well, two things I want to just respond to. Rocco Landsman in the NEA has been doing amazing things, and one of the things he's done is to insert the idea that art and culture permeate all of the actions of human civilization. And that plays out in his success in getting Department of Agriculture, Department of Interior, et cetera, to all recognize that they have funds that can access the assets of art makers. And that's happening in this administration, that unsiloing of the federal
HUD money going to artists to do this kind of
It-
work.
It's happening. How long it's going to continue in this direction is at stake right now.
That's something that happens on November 6th.
It really does. It very
It really
specifically
does.
does.
Absolutely
Yeah.
it does.
Yeah.
But the other, oh shoot, I lost the other one.
Well, just funders, Mellon's in the conversation, Irvine's in the conversation, Duke is in the conversation. There's the big funders are having all these convenings now, and the word engagement is bold typed across all of them.
Yes.
But the question is what they mean by it and who they're bringing to the
Absolutely.
table. So I know I'm like, and a lot of people are like going, I better be at that table to make sure that they're not
Absolutely.
just old school about it.
And the other thing I did want to say
Yeah.
is that I'm right now in the midst of reading and sharing in the class a book that I discovered just recently. It's a little late. It came out in 2005. But James Graves has written a book, Cultural Democracy. And it outlines a lot of this and is really very insightful and calls for revolution. And it's not a revolution of discord, but a revolution of ways of thinking about art and culture as part of our civilization.
This is an observation. I was on a small subcommittee at the University of Iowa to write, to explore getting Carnegie Engaged designation. We are not yet, we don't have that yet. And in doing so, I went back to read the history of public universities, public state universities, and originally universities were formed to do the very things that we're talking about.
Particularly the land grant.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
To be engaged with the public, to go out and address larger social issues and cultural issues. So I think we can make a case that this organization is taking us back as university people to our roots and to our history. And it's extraordinarily powerful and compelling. How did we get away from that?
That's a long conversation.
That's a session in the next room.
Well, going towards product.
Yeah.
instead of-
It's how you begin, it's always like, these are about relationships, it's always how you begin your relationship. And I think that if you begin it in a way that overtly excludes somebody, or the funder isn't there, but it is relationship building, and it is, so you're asking about sustainability, and your question is like then, I'm like, well, I always thought it was at the beginning. It never even occurred to me that it would be an ending. It was our beginning conversation, it wasn't an ending, so I think how you begin it is critical. And I just wanted to say something really quick. My major question yesterday when we, Pergonis and King John was there, is that they had really two different entities of work. They had those in the community, for lack of a better word, it overtly asked, I need you to help us give voice. And then there was artists initiating, facilitating. And my question was, well, what is the impact of that work? Are there distinctions among those particular ones, not aesthetically or socially, sustainability? So I think beginnings are critical in all of this work. And whether it's semantics, whether it's players, whether it's promises, I think that you have to figure out those beginnings. And I don't have an answer for that, except that I know that they lend itself to the rest of whatever that journey.
And I have a last thought, and then I want to close this because we're over time now. So.
I'm sorry, I just
No,
wanted to comment, we just finished a 2-year Duke-funded project at Penn State, and this process in terms of the town hall and in the beginnings would have been, as the project director, I now can say that this would have been extremely helpful and useful in terms of, we had architects, landscape architects, engineers talk about, undefined problems and what the heck do you expect me to do when the problem is not defined, and dancers together in this project. And so what is the end game didn't really surface until very, very close to the end game. So, 2 years ago, facilitating a project like this, the process like this would have been, so I've been sufficiently chastened for the future, and so I really appreciate this framework.
Really, thank you.
I want to say 3 things. One, I want to say that the Center for Performance and Civic Practice, this is the website. It's thecpcp.org, and there's resources on there, as well as some articles I've written lately about this kind of work, and so that's a place to sort of follow a lot of the work happening there. Townhallnation.org you saw before. If you've gotten intrigued by the Town Hall Nation idea and you're like, I want to do one later this academic year, great. Go on that site and contact me and let's help you think about that. That's great. And I also want to acknowledge and thank Decky and Callie and Bob so much for sharing their projects as well as doing their great work. And when is your session? Is it this afternoon?
This afternoon. 2:30?
2:30. So there's a session called Building Home, where Bob and Carol will present more about that project, and I'll be in the back shouting things out about Sojourn's participation.
It's room 07.
Room 07, which is very hard to find on this floor.
But it's here.
But it's here. Yeah. And thank you very much for joining us. We did not lose a person. We did people. That's exciting.
The vortex.
The vortex, the consensual vortex.
The vortex.
I gotta ask, what are you working on?
Consensual.
We're actually consensual.
That's the thing I'm working on now.
Yeah.
Doing that in a big way.
Like my thing, I was thinking about kind of look at them. They say artists can look or invest in archive and as well conservative of a commonwealth and move that and stuff,
Right, and
You're right.
it's just, I might borrow on his, let him figure out mine.
it is funny about the whole, like,
I know,
what
I
I
know.
know, definitely like the whole parallel.
Okay.
Descriptions here.
And stuff and if we're also not talking about stuff. Yeah, and then like how the authors understand is still.
She's gonna be here.
We're gonna be
She told me it went well. So let's just look at. You're gonna do to these two. I don't know. I think this one, if I remember, is somebody who has sharing method of how to share stories, and you've got like one of the best people there. This one might be different.
I'm an artist, I have to is about.
I mean, there's a lot of like
Reimagining
Yes. Yes. That sounds awesome.
Yeah.
I'm assuming you guys are going to stay connected with us so we can stay in the conversation. Thank you. I want to come visit you guys. Town Hall Nature. That's great. That's great.
And they.
Speaking of cards, I'm realizing now I need
Yeah.
which I just did the other day for this Virginia Association of Press.
Are they interested? That's great for you. That's great.
But a lot of them have voices and I'm like,
Yeah. Thanks. I'll get you cards. I'll get you Liam's card.
yeah.
Because he's
So,
the.
I mean, if I can give people the cards,
Give them cards. It's great. We're working on a one-pager for you, but I'll get your cards.
yeah, that was right, with the one pager.
Yeah, it's coming. Shannon, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, nice to meet you.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to my thing.
Not at all.
Okay, because they are doing.
Carol, I'll see you at your section.
Okie dokie.
International.
The International Coalition for Science and Conscience.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it is historic science museums all over the world. The Holocaust Museum.
With its own community. How could it not be organized? Uninterested is really easy. Because you got those
Wow.
So here.
No, super interesting.
I think.
For sites of conscience. What a
And their whole,
great
and
name.
one of their big things is creating dialogue.
Yeah. Yeah, we
About
should.
social issues. So yeah, it's very, it's, again with that whole like parallel paths
Yeah.
that we always see.
I think this Whitney Simpson
Yeah.
every day, really very focused.
That, you know, when they're
Oh, yeah, oh, yeah.
Yeah, agreed. Oh, I'm so glad. Oh, great. It's very nice to meet you.
When I was like, just sort of.
Thank you. I don't have that. I didn't bring any either. Yeah. Well, just be in touch. The Town Hall Nation site, you can get to me through there. Or Sojourn, I'll send you any. Yeah. I love it down there. You know, we were at Duke in residence a lot last year, and I've been to Chapel Hill.
Which is also really
Yeah. They don't share with me. The theater department. Yeah. We were with faculty members who are sort of on the margins of the theater department doing this interesting work. That's what we worked with. We worked with Jules. We worked with Jules and we worked with, I don't know. She was one of our main collaborators. Her and Nina, who's gone. Yeah.
tables
So,
like
that's so,
why would they
Yeah.
It's good to meet you.
great to meet you.
Thank you.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Got it, we never told you.
And now it's like.
You talking about Annette? No.
You did the thing in Detroit. You were in Detroit.
Yeah, we're just in Detroit.
There's another
We
one.
didn't know, we know the
There's
day
another one in
after.
like 2 weeks.
There's another one coming up in October.
We had no idea
Yeah.
until I saw it on your
You
Facebook.
didn't know, you didn't know about it and weren't
No,
included?
none of us, none of the, none of that whole part
Right,
of it, none
and
of
that's,
us were.
yeah,
So until I saw it on Lisa's Facebook, I had no clue. Because I'm here in Detroit, I'm like, I was like, huh? You ever in the Howell?
It was super interesting.
so what, for me is, one distinction between ensemble is that the company understands it's basically, the premise is we're doing plays. We think we're better than, and maybe not quite as good as, but we're also doing